So folks, let's talk about some Shadowfang Keep custom cards. We just left Wailing Caverns in real Hearthstone, and I was curious what another iconic lower level dungeon might look like if you designed some cards for it. So decided to head over to Shadowfang Keep, and you guys made some really cool cards themed on the area, the bosses, low level dungeons, and more. This video is sponsored by Keeps, which we'll talk about a little later, but for now, let's take a look at Robes of Aragal from Maniac. This would be a 6-mana dual class card for Priest and Warlock. It's got base spell damage +1, so some nice upside there, but also really cool effect here that affects how you can construct your deck, which I think is something that we should see in Hearthstone eventually. That would be really cool. With this card in your deck, you can also add up to 5 mage cards into your deck. So basically giving you access to some extra stuff in Priest and Warlock, because Aragal's, I guess, kind of fusing all these worlds together, is the ultimate magic user of some sort. And I love this idea, like opening up access to fireballs for Priest with some spell damage to boot could be something crazy to give them some extra reach, or the same for Warlock. I don't know if there's some way to break this inherently right now in Hearthstone. There certainly might be, but that can always be designed around based on rotations as well. So I just love the idea of manipulating your deck in a different way by adding a card. We kind of saw that with Whizbang a little bit in the past and Whizbang style cards. This takes it in a different direction that would be really fun to see the possibilities that could open up. So next up, here's the Hasty Tank from Leon, and I love this card so much because it's basically capturing the idea of like a low-level dungeon experience in World of Warcraft when you have a tank that's just pulling way too fast and pulling way too many mobs and your party can't keep up and you basically get swarmed by a bunch of stuff. And this is a 3-mana 3/7 with Rush, Battlecry summon 3 1/1 ghouls for your opponent. So this tank has summoned too many things and suddenly you got to fight all these extra units. This looks a lot like the card whose name escapes me in the neutral set there. It's a 3/7 that summons 3 1/1 Huntresses for your opponent, and it doesn't have Rush, but this would be a class card, and I love the Rush flavor in particular because you'd expect a tank, a big defensive character, to have Taunt, but he's not a good tank. He's a hasty tank. He's running in, so instead he has Rush, and that's just like a flavor home run for this card. It really captures that Warcraft experience I think we've all had, and I think it makes this card much better than that Huntresses card that sort of does the same thing, or we've seen some other ones in the past as well. Cornered Sentry, I think, was the old school one in Unguro maybe, but this just takes that formula and makes it viable, I think, because a 3/7 with Rush would instantly trade into one of these and you'd have a really nicely statted and potentially self-damaged minion on board, all of which are quite synergistic for Warrior. I don't know if the stats on this card are perfect, but man, everything about it fits the class and the theme perfectly. Moving on here to I'm Lost from Manta Rainer. It's a 4-mana paladin spell. And again, it kind of plays towards that dungeon experience where back in the day, people would like try to find a dungeon and they couldn't get there because they'd never been there before. So they'd get lost and then they'd show up late. And with this card, it says after 2 turns, summon a legendary minion from your deck. So basically you're going to get this awesome legendary, but it's going to show up a little bit late because you're spending 4 mana now for a payoff later. And this is, of course, a cool way to like tutor an effect out of your deck. Old school Malagos style stuff could be pretty sweet with this, where you have a guaranteed Malagos set up on board or whatever other card and effect that might exist. Maybe it's just that big Tyrion style minion. Maybe it's some combo or setup sneaky enabler. I don't care. I just really like the feel and flavor again of this card. I hope there's no way to break it though, because this is a really cool design. Moving on to Morrison from Magic Milk. This is a 4-mana 3/2 neutral legendary with Battlecry. Swap the attack, health, and cost of a random minion in your hand with your opponents. So pretty cool effect here, kind of a hand disruption manipulation effect. Also a callback to the Worgen cards we saw in the Witchwood, and Shadowfang Keep and Witchwood certainly share some thematic connections there. So pretty neat. And the idea here is, right, you have basically some awesome, crazy, high cost thing in hand, maybe with a nice battle cry. Think of like, I don't know, Shutterwalk style minion, right? And you want to swap the cost of that with something tiny in your opponent's hand. They got a 1-drop chilling in hand. You can make your Shutterwalk style card 1 mana, and you don't necessarily mind sacrificing the attack or health. But alternatively, you have to be a little bit careful, because if you have something cheap in hand, this is targeting a random minion. So you could accidentally make your opponent's awesome big thing super cheap and make your tiny thing super expensive, which could be a major downside. And perhaps a third angle is that you have something really small in hand with a neat effect that might maybe scale with stats. Think about like an Angry Chicken style card, where you want it to have bigger and better stats, and hopefully better than Angry Chicken, but as an example. And then you want to make that like a 6 mana 6/6. So you try to swap your Angry Chicken with something bigger and higher statted in your opponent's hand, and then you got maybe a minion you can play off of in some new and interesting way. But the fact that this is swapping all 3 stats basically helps check the balance on it a little bit, so that you're not doing anything absolutely crazy. And if you're getting a big stat upgrade, you're getting a stat increase usually to correlate with that increase in effectiveness. So nothing gets crazy snowbally out of control, except maybe big effects on a smaller minion like that Shutterwalk that we talked about. All right, with Mayor Morrison out of the way, let's take a look at our sponsor for this video. It's Keeps. That's right. If you didn't know, 2 out of 3 dudes are going to have some form of male pattern baldness by the time they're 35 years old. I can see the stats. I know how many of you are either there or creeping up on that number, but the good news is the best way to prevent hair loss is to do something about it while you still have some left. And Keeps makes that super easy. You don't have to visit a doctor to get your prescription. You can talk to one online and get it shipped right to your door. It simply doesn't get any easier than that. So if you're noticing you're losing your hair, it's time to do something about it. You can visit keeps.com/Regis for a limited time to get 50% off your first order. Just click that link in the description and it'll take you right there. Now let's get back to the cards. Next up here is Baron Asheberry from Kryptonic, and this does unfortunately reuse the artwork from Lord Godfrey, but I'm going to let it slide because I really like the design on this card. It's a 4 mana 2/7 legendary for Warlock, and it reads, if your deck is empty, replace your deck with a copy of each card you burned this game. And I think this is so cool because we've got this like Niru style thing happening in Warlock. It's not very good. It's hard to make Niru work. You start taking too much fatigue damage. A card like Baron Asheberry could come in, fill in those gaps really nicely. It would also encourage you to do some cool things like burn your own deck. And that doesn't mean with cards like Ticketus or Altar of Fire, those aren't burned, they're destroyed. But with cards like, say, Backfire or just a bunch of card draw on Warlock, you can basically overdraw your hand, start burning cards that way while effectively still moving through your deck very quickly, being able to replace anything really important that you lost via Baron Asheberry, and just really accelerating into that Niru game plan. So I would love a card like this that helps you recover basically after you empty your deck and play Niru. I think this would be the perfect solution for that. Moving on to the Eerie Lantern from Tic Tac. It's a 1 mana 0/3 neutral weapon a la Sphere of Sapience, and it reads, each turn reveal a card in your opponent's hand. So I guess at the start of your turn, or maybe I should just say at the start of your turn, because each turn's always confusing in Hearthstone. I'm going to assume it's just once per cycle. You're going to see a card in your opponent's hand. And this is basically just like a little reconnaissance card. You're holding up a lantern, looking into the dark forest around Shadowfang Keep and seeing what horrors lie in wait. And again, I think that's a really cool thematic design on this card. Would this ever be good? I don't know. It's reconnaissance is nice, information is nice, but you are still giving up a draw and a slot in your deck for just information. And sometimes information doesn't go as far as just stuff you can actually do. This could be another removal card or another resource generator. So there's some downside there, but there might be the deck here and there that cares enough about what their opponent's doing, like when to play that Mutanus, when to do some hand disruption stuff, that Eerie Lantern could earn a spot. Moving on to Commander Springvale from Beastie Hedgehog, a big 7 mana 7/7 legendary for Paladin with the death rattle. For the rest of the game, your holy spells that restore health deal damage instead. And I love it's like a shadow paladin, an evil paladin. We don't see this much. Priest gets to do that, but paladin doesn't much. Maybe this would theoretically fit better in priest and paladin, but I don't care. I like this idea of an evil dark paladin in Shadowfang Keep. I don't even know Springvale's story, assuming it fits, but it's a cool design regardless. If you look right now, there aren't that many holy spells in paladin that actually would be beneficial for this. Things like Libram of Hope do come to mind though, and instead of healing yourself with Libram of Hope, it could be a really big burst damage spell that not only hits your opponent super hard, but also of course summons you a nice big body on top of that. That said, Springvale here himself is pretty slow. Just as a big dumb body, it's a little bit susceptible to any kind of transformer silence effect since this is all baked into a death rattle. So I don't think this would necessarily be overpowered or broken, even if it did open up Librams of Hope, or you know, if there was a future meta without Librams, maybe there could be some smaller, more limited spells to enable Springvale in a post turn 7 scenario. So next up here's the Pirewood Culinarian from Magic Milk. It's a 2-mana 3/2 Warlock card, and it adds a Cursed Delicacy to each player's hand. And then that Cursed Delicacy is a 1-mana spell that deals 3 damage to your hero and draws 2 cards. So I like taking this self-damage stuff in Warlock and basically doubling down and giving it to your opponent and saying, look, you want to do this, you want to race, let's freaking race, because you know generally you're going to benefit more from taking the damage or be more readily available to take that damage, not as risky for you perhaps as your opponent. And Warlock loves drawing cards traditionally as well, so you assume that although this is a symmetrical effect, it's one you're definitely going to benefit from more. You also just might be able to bait your opponent into taking too much damage while you set up whatever fun stuff. So I like the idea here of both people trying to decide, like, is this worth it? Am I willing to do this? But most of the time, both people are going to take the option to eat the Cursed Delicacy and see how the game unfolds. So you really ratchet up the speed of the game with all this extra card draw and a little bit of extra damage too. So next up here's the Stray Fireball from Manta Rainer, and this one's a lot like the Hasty Tank, and is it actually maybe even from the same person? I don't remember the names, but anyway, 2-mana spell for Mage that would summon 2 1/1 wolves for your opponent and then deal 6 damage to a random enemy, and that's enemy, not enemy minion, so this can occasionally hit face. And again, I love the idea of this as like a mage in a low level dungeon who's basically mistargeted and, you know, accidentally pulled some mobs from a mob camp they weren't supposed to pull yet because they just accidentally fireballed the wrong group of stuff. And then you got to deal with all these extra wolves that just snowballed into your fight. That can be scary. This captures that again. And this is cool, right? Because it's very efficient face damage. Sometimes 2 mana for 6 damage is really quite crazy if it can go face. But because it's summoning the wolves first, you only ever have a 1 in 3 chance of going face. And then sometimes you're just going to waste this on a wolf, and you're going to leave your opponent with another wolf, and you basically did nothing for 2 mana except take a chance to hit face. So it's kind of got like a Leroy vibe there as well, where Leroy would summon stuff, but Leroy was controlled, and this is random. So I don't think this would be great for the game. It's a little bit too RNG driven. Like sometimes you're just going to do 2 of these and your opponent's going to take 12 and be super frustrated at that like 11% roll that they just got hit with. But I love the idea of it. It seems like a card Hearthstone would print, even if it's not necessarily great for the game. So a lot of cool stuff here, but not a card I necessarily want to see. And then finally here we have Halford the Holy from Kogeti. It's an 8-mana 3/3 legendary for priest that gives your friendly minions divine shield wherever they are. And this one, actually, it's funny that paladin card seemed like a priest card. This kind of seems like more of a paladin card, but I'm okay with it because priest, discipline priest in particular in Warcraft, has all these bubbles they're throwing on people, and they're preventing damage via bubbles. Paladin is not the only class with bubbles and shields, so it always felt a little weird in Hearthstone that priest didn't deal with divine shields all that often. They occasionally get some, right? But it's felt much like a paladin thing. I would love to see a card like Halford come along and give priest the option to do some divine shield stuff. And this effect is pretty crazy. It's divine shields on board, divine shields in hand, and divine shields in deck. And I don't know if this is too good. I haven't really thought about it yet, but I mean, every minion for the rest of the game you play, as long as it was already created or already existed in deck and not later created, is going to have Divine Shield. I mean, some big scary taunts and stuff, and just any little venomous scorpion you play with Divine Shield. It might be too good, but you are spending 8 mana to basically do nothing for a little while. I guess it's an 8 mana 3/3, but it doesn't have taunt or rush or anything. So, I mean, a 3/3 with Divine Shield, I should say, kind of like a Talon style body, because he's a friendly minion as well. But I don't know. It's a cool effect. If you think this would be broken, let me know. Would it be too good, too crazy strong in Priest? Would they recover too hard? Can they afford to spend this 8 mana without really any downsides? I'm not totally sure. And that's it. Those are the Shadowfang Keep themed cards. I mean, frankly, some of these weren't exactly Shadowfang Keep so much as like low level dungeon stuff, but others certainly seem to capture the flavor and feel of the area, so I'll take it. Hasty Tank was actually a different person than Manta Rainer, by the way. I just double checked. That's kind of wild. So anyway, thanks for submitting all these cards, folks. That was awesome. And for our next custom card review, I want you to make me some Stormwind themed cards. We got this crazy teaser that the next expansion looks like it's gonna have something to do with Stormwind or City Guards or Elwyn Forest. So make me something based on Stormwind, maybe the surrounding areas. We can go all the way to Deadmines if you want, or keep it to Stormwind proper, but something related to Stormwind, the Alliance, or the surrounding couple zones around Stormwind. And of course, find the link in the description to submit those cards. All that said, thanks much for watching. Thanks much to Keeps for sponsoring this video. And until next time, game on.